In March of 1922, the residents of a remote Bavarian farmstead known as Hinterkaifeck stopped showing up in the local village. Days later, a search party forced their way onto the property and found all 6 members of the household, including a 2-year-old child, slaughtered. But whoever committed this crime didn't drop their weapon and run into the woods. For 3 entire days following the massacre, the perpetrator occupied the home. They stoked the winter stove, consumed bread and meat from the family's pantry, and even went out into the yard to feed the livestock and the dog, living a quiet domestic life mere feet from the decaying bodies. Most perpetrators of mass violence operate on pure adrenaline, followed by an immediate instinct for self-preservation and escape. Lingering at a bloody crime scene when neighbors are bound to notice the victims missing contradicts every standard psychological expectation. That 72-hour domestic stay is the single most important piece of data. It allows us to move past the ghost stories and focus entirely on the perpetrator's specific behavioral choices. To understand why a killer felt comfortable staying on the property, we have to look at the environment surrounding it. Rural Germany in the early days of the Weimar Republic was navigating an extreme economic collapse. Hyperinflation destroyed livelihoods, and communities responded by becoming highly defensive, insular, and distrustful of outsiders. Within that guarded environment, the victims, the Gruber-Gabriel family, were completely alienated. The surrounding villagers universally despised them. The family patriarch, Andreas Gruber, had a well-known hostile temperament, and the local animosity was rooted in documented abuse. Several years prior, Andreas and his adult daughter, Victoria, had been legally convicted of incest, resulting in prison time for both. This top-down diagram maps out the isolated property, and it highlights a discovery Andreas made just days before the murders. He found fresh tracks in the snow leading direct in from the tree line to the broken lock of the farm's machine room. There were no corresponding tracks leading back out. Because of his pride and the deep social wedge between his household and the town, Andreas refused offers of help and never reported the intrusions to the police. Their extreme isolation created a vacuum of vigilance. Obvious signs of an active stalker went completely ignored. The stalker finally struck late on the evening of Friday, March 31st. Using a luring strategy, the assailant made noises in the barn to draw 4 of the adults out of the living quarters, ambushing them one by one in the dark. The perpetrator didn't arrive with a firearm. They picked up the family's own heavy agricultural mattock, a pickaxe-like farming tool, and used it to inflict catastrophic cranial trauma on each victim. With the primary threats eliminated, the killer moved into the main house. They proceeded to the maid's bedchamber to kill the newly hired Maria Baumgartner, and then finally crushed the skull of 2-year-old Joseph as he slept in his bassinet, ensuring no witnesses survived. The temporal buffer the killer bought themselves worked perfectly. When concerned neighbors finally broke into the property 4 days later, chaos ensued. Before professional detectives arrived, dozens of villagers trampled through the blood, shifted the bodies, and even sat down to eat meals in the family kitchen, completely destroying the crime scene. The Munich police were so desperate for leads that they actually decapitated the corpses and sent the skulls to local clairvoyants in hopes of receiving psychic guidance. The readings yielded nothing, and the skulls were eventually lost during the Allied bombings of World War II. The contamination of the initial search and the loss of physical evidence mean there is very little forensic data left to test. If we want to identify the killer today, we have to rely entirely on the one pristine data point that survived: their behavior. In 2007, the Fürstenfeldbruck Police Academy reopened the archives. Their modern investigative review bypassed the physical evidence and applied behavioral profiling to the case's strange anomalies. The first profile they tested was political. Specifically, Adolf and Anton Gump, 2 brothers involved in a far-right militia known to have executed Silesian farmers during the political violence of the era. While the Gumps possessed the capacity for extreme violence, their operational behavior rules them out. Hardened political hitmen execute a target and retreat to a safe house. They do not linger at a vulnerable location for a weekend to perform domestic chores. This checklist compares the Hinterkaifeck crime scene to a much more compelling suspect, Paul Mueller. Mueller was a serial killer who targeted isolated farms near railways, hid in attics, and used local tools. The match is nearly perfect, except for one contradiction. Mueller took the next train out immediately. A 3-day domestic stay is completely incompatible with that behavior. The 72-hour stay serves as a filter. It rules out the transient, the thrill seeker, or the political hitman, shifting the focus away from wandering outsiders and directly toward an intimate, localized threat. This probability model visualizes the weight of the evidence. The deep familiarity with the farm layout, the missing keys, and the comfort to linger point toward a pre-existing local grievance. Historical records single out one specific neighbor, Lorenz Schlittenbauer. Schlittenbauer had a clear motive. He was locked in a bitter, highly public legal and financial feud with Andreas Gruber over the disputed paternity of 2-year-old Josef, whom Schlittenbauer claimed was actually the product of the ongoing incest in the Gruber home. His behavior when his search party finally discovered the bodies was highly suspicious. While the other men recoiled in the yard, Schlittenbauer immediately walked alone into the main house and unlocked the front door from the inside without a moment of hesitation. He already had the missing key. 3 years later, in 1925, Schlittenbauer made a revealing behavioral sub-up. While wandering the demolished ruins of the farmstead, he told a witness that the killer hadn't buried the bodies in the barn because of the frozen ground. That is an operational detail you only know if you were the person swinging the shovel on the exact weekend of the murder. Due to German privacy laws protecting living descendants, the modern police academy officially protects the final name they settled on, but the behavioral evidence leaves little to the imagination. Hinterkaifeck is a demonstration of what happens when extreme social alienation breeds a predator in plain sight.